Welcome to the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership Podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a drop of straight talk you can't get anywhere else. We discuss the whiskeys to drink, music to listen to, and what it really takes to be an effective leader. I'm your host, Galen Bingham, the leadership strategist. Tonight's guest, President and CEO of SSM Health, Laura Kaiser. Hey, what you drinking? Sometimes you have to go with something that is incredibly classic. And this conversation that I'm going to have with you is with someone who I have seen from afar. I've seen relatively close. And, she is just a classic leader. I mean, everything that I talk about on this show and in other places, I have seen her do specifically in the right situations. Now, I'm not with her all the time, but when I've seen her, I'm like, yep, she checked that box. Yep, she did that. And boy, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. So when I ran into her, it was just top of mind that I had to have Ms. Laura Kaiser on the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership show. So Laura, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be such a great conversation. I can already anticipate that we are going to not only have a lot of fun, but we're going to really get into some rich leadership conversation, but not from necessarily just from a theoretical, this works in the business school class or in the book, but practical. How do you make this thing happen? Because your leadership footprint is about as large as many of the people that I talk with. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just so excited. I'm getting ahead of myself. I've got to ask the ever important question. So what are you drinking?
Well, it's a late afternoon. I have a glass of Brut Rosé champagne because I'm not a whiskey drinker.
All right. Tell me a little bit more about that. Where does that come from?
So it comes from a bottle that began in California, a vineyard called Schramsberg, and it's Brut Rosé, which means it's a champagne that has a little pink tinge to it, and it's pretty delicious. I highly recommend it if you feel like an alternative to whiskey.
Well, fantastic. Well, hey, look, I can appreciate having your own thing, right? Your own beverage that you can. Usually people think that you only break out champagne when there is reason to celebrate, but I believe every day is a reason to celebrate. So I absolutely, again, good call, good call. So that means that I need to stay true to my brand, because a lot of listeners tell me that they check out the shows just to see what whiskeys they need to pick up. So because this is going to be such a classic conversation, I went with something that is at the foundation of what I enjoy about whiskey. And a couple of weeks back, I had the opportunity to actually tour the Buffalo Trace Distillery out in Bardstown, Kentucky. And they said, hey, right down the street is the Buffalo Trace Distillery. I walked in and they happened to have on the shelf at regular manufacturer's retail price, Colonel E.H. Taylor small batch. So I picked up a couple bottles. I was so excited. Because that means that I am free to open up the one bottle of Colonel E.H. Taylor that I had, that I was afraid to open up because I couldn't find any more. So I'm gonna pull this out, because you got the little wooden canister that this is in, and I'm even pulling the plastic on this bad boy.
This is very special.
I was afraid to do this. Because you can't. So, and then I'm gonna open this up.
Look, you only live once.
That's right. Pour me some of this. See, and I can go past a finger pour, because I got like 4 of these bottles now. This is going to be a pretty everyday experience for me. Now, Colonel E.H. Taylor, I believe, is one of the cornerstones element of the Buffalo Trace lineup, the Buffalo Trace family. You know, there's a couple of other that might be above that small batch, but Bottled and Bond, this is about as real as it gets. It's a great foundational whiskey when you can find it. But the reason I pull this out, as I said earlier, Laura, is because your background for the industry that you're in makes a whole lot of sense, right? You've done all the right things to prepare you for the role that you're in now. That doesn't mean that the role that you're in is easy. It just means that you've got the background that allows you to tackle some of the decisions that come your way, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that come your way. I would love for you to share a little bit about that background and how it has prepared you for the role that you have now, the seat that you sit in now, where I mean, you've got I think upwards of 40,000 people who are looking at you at a certain point to say, okay, leader, where are we going and how we're going to get there? So, talk a little bit about that journey, that preparation that has landed you in the seat that you're in.
So I come from a wonderful family and parents that grounded me in the belief that I could do anything, which not everyone gets that blessing. And so I think they would have described me as a curious child and busy. I was always super busy. And so when I learned about the field of health administration, it seemed pretty interesting to me. We had some healthcare people in our family, but I had a bad run in with a chemistry class and thought, I think I'm not going that route. And I was more about the business side of things. So I got my academic preparation with health administration and also master of business because I felt like I wanted to round that out and go a little deeper than the traditional health administration program. And for my career, I've had a lot of great experiences in a lot of different parts of the healthcare industry. So in consulting, in startup, in traditional health systems, in health plan, just in different parts of developing new services and products, physician practice management, and all of that eclectic experience has helped to prepare me so that when I'm in different situations, it's not always a direct line of, oh, this fits right here because it's the same, but it's relevant that I can reach there into my background and apply it in a given situation. So I think I've been really fortunate to have had all of those diverse experiences to date.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a conversation, actually a couple of conversations that I had. I think it was season three, where we talked with Jim Dinkins, former president of Coca-Cola North America, when I was there, when we were there together, and he's now the CEO of the Honey Baked Ham Company. Mr. Dave Peacock, a mutual friend and acquaintance of ours, former president and CEO of Anheuser-Busch, and now he's doing all kinds of amazing things. Every time I mention his name, he's done something. He's doing something different. But they each talked about how in the beginning of your career, you draw a straight line between this is where I am, this is where I'm going to be, and I'm probably going to be there in 18 months. And you end up taking all these side opportunities, these detours that might not make sense to that original plan. But when you finally land in the seat, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I took that stint in marketing. I'm so glad that I had that run in operations and had to do that for a lot longer, because that is what gives you the texture to make the kinds of decisions that you make now. And you're starting to suggest that that was the case with you as well. What were some of those avenues that didn't fit that original plan that you might have had when you were 22 years old, but you're so glad that that detour, that incident happened, because you can draw on that now?
I really like the word texture that you used. I had not thought of that. I thought of it in that word before. I think that's a really applicable word for what you're asking. I would say, I don't know if I have any specific experiences. I'd have to sit with that for a second and have something pop out, but it's more what's coming to mind across my mental marquee is when you have had different, what at the time feel like difficulties or failures, and where you skin your knees, experience really is an excellent teacher. And so or being around different leaders where you'll see them doing something where you'll think, wow, I admire that. That really worked. I'm gonna tuck that into my toolkit. Or wow, that didn't go well at all. Or oh, that wasn't so great. And we all have those. So it's more of just the different experiences along the way. And then the recall when you're in a new situation to say, wait, this applies, and you pull it in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've said this a couple of times. I don't know that I've ever been in any situation, nor have I ever talked to a leader where they said that they've done something really well the first time, and they said, okay, now let's break that apart and see what we can learn from it, right? You usually, when things go well, you keep it moving, but boy, when things don't go well, I still might not know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to try doggedly not to do that again. Let's break this down and figure that out.
Well, and I also would say sometimes the gifts that are innate, that are just things that you've been given or you've learned over time, you may not think are that special because, they come relatively easily to you where you may have worked really hard to develop a skill in some area. It's really important to have that self-awareness because just because there's something that you may be able to do really well doesn't mean it comes easily to everyone. And you need to be aware of that, both for your own application, but also in helping others reach their potential. And it's important to have that self-awareness.
Oh, I love that. I love that. We talk a lot about emotional intelligence and how in the early stages of your career, IQ is really, really important. And usually that's how you make a name for yourself is by being incredibly smart for whatever function they're bringing you in for. As you become more senior, however, you still have to have the IQ, right? You still have to have the chops, but it's really about that emotional intelligence. And the first element of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Do you understand who you are and what triggers you and what gets you going and your strengths? Talk a little bit about how this awareness of emotional intelligence or your self-awareness has really paid dividends for you, maybe even more dividends than IQ, which again, you still got to have the chops, right? But that EQ becomes even more important. Can you think of a time when that was the case?
Absolutely. So first, I want to talk about the IQ for a second, though, because I think for so many of us, whether we're part of a team or we're the leader, it's kind of surprising where you feel like, oh, I'm kind of a young buck and I'm a star, and then suddenly you're like, oh, when did I stop being this? And suddenly you're older, and it's kind of shocking. At least it was to me. So that's kind of that IQ while you're continuing to unfold. On the EQ side, I would say I think it's really about empathy, and maybe with life experience, it's not always about chronological age, but I do think experience can burnish all of us, and we all have rocks in our path and experiences that we've had that hopefully shape us to become more empathetic to all different kinds of situations. And I think that's essential to get a sense of where each individual is or where a team is to help find your way through that and to help each person reach their potential. Because, by the way, when you do that, so goes the organization. And so I think it's about empathy and having really good listening skills.
Now, is that something that you picked up along the way, and as you were having those experiences, kind of put that in the bucket of empathy, or is that something that you identified? Hey, look, I really need to develop more skill, more experience in empathy because that's going to be important to me. Which came first, the understanding or the experience?
Well, I like to think I've always been a kind person because I feel really strongly about being kind, and being service minded is part of that. But I would have to say, I really think it's been something that I've worked at over the years because I think it's really important in terms of being part of humanity, but also it's really important to get a sense of where each person is. You can't have one leadership style and apply it with a blunt hand. You have to be able to draw out, listen to people, learn where they are, learn where the organizational culture is. So I think it's just something that's an unending life journey.
Yeah, I love that. That when you have a brand new hammer everything looks like a nail. So, your job, especially earlier in your career, before you get to the CEO seat, is to collect as many tools as you possibly can. Learn how to use those tools. Use them the wrong way. Mess up some stuff because you're not using the tool properly yet. So that when you get to where you are, I'm going to tell you, I mean, $10.5 billion. That's not a small number. You're managing one of the largest, if not the largest, and you can correct me, one of the largest Catholic oriented hospital systems in the country. Is SSM the largest or is it one of the largest? I know you're right up there.
Yeah, it's not the largest, but we're a large system. We operate in 4 states, and our home base is St. Louis, but we're in the Midwest, so we're in the heartland.
Yeah. So I mean, so pretty significant seat. I mean, when you strike a pin, there's some implications to that signature. So by the time you get to that seat, you want to make sure that you've tried some things. You kind of know what your tendencies are. You know what your strengths, your watch outs might be, so that and you started talking about this a little bit already, so that you can identify what skills you need to have around you. A lot of times, and I know I certainly did this early in my management career, I would find those people who had similar traits to me, right? And they must be good because they went to the exact same school I did. They like the exact same football team. They must be good people. And boy, we had a lot of fun at those meetings, but we weren't as productive because we were all approaching things in a very similar way. What's the value or the importance of identifying your strengths, but then also identifying tapping people who have different strengths than you to sit at that leadership table?
So this is one of my favorite subjects because I think a lot about. There's a lot of conversation about DE&I these days, and so I want to focus on diversity for a second and about diversity of perspective. And perspective is shaped by all of the different life experiences one has, plus genetics, plus a little bit of fairy dust in there. I mean, it's just kind of this compilation, each one of us, in terms of who we are as people. I always think about diversity bringing things better. And I don't see a lot of black and white. I see a lot of gray in leadership. So it is about if we're all the same, a lot of us aren't needed. And so diversity of perspective and experiences and gifts can make any situation richer. And I'm really not an absolutist, but on that one, I'm pretty convicted on that because I've seen it over and over again for the different gifts and skills that people bring. And my job as a leader is to help create the environment where people are inclined to bring that perspective and those diversity, the diverse opinions and perspectives and experiences to make the decision better. I have the final say, but I want to mix it up in the conversations that we're having and have it be an environment where people feel safe to do just that.
Yeah. I'll tell you the rough part about what you just said because I totally agree with you that the decisions can only be as good as the diversity of the input that went into making that decision. But I'll tell you, well, when you got people in the room who don't think, they don't process the way I process, they want to look at these kinds of numbers when I really want to look at the big picture. They're asking these questions that I really just want to execute. I don't really want to answer those kinds of questions. That's not as comfortable as having a whole bunch of Galen Binghams at the table, and we're all rocking and rolling. How do you guard against that desire that most people feel when people aren't thinking exactly the way you are, right? And the very diversity that you're looking for when you come face to face with that in a room and you're like, oh my gosh, Jim or Bob, I wish you would just see things the way I do. How do you manage against that internally?
Yeah, I think it's kind of situational. So it depends on what's at hand. So sometimes you're fighting against time constraints, and so you don't have the time to allow it to kind of unfold. One needs to be more decisive, or stakes are super high, emotions are running high, whatever that is. But I would say it makes me think about parenting. So in parenting, you have a toolkit where you can reach in, you can rummage around and you can reach in the toolkit and take out the tool that says you do it because I said so. But you better do that sparingly, because if you use that all the time, it completely loses its ability. And so sometimes my point is, I like to get lots of input and such, but sometimes I have to just say, I'm calling time. We're going this direction. You have to you can't just always have participative leadership. Sometimes you have to take it all in and make a judgment call. And so, and you have to have the ability to know when you can let it roll. You've got to be good at change management to help people along through that process. And people, and you know this, you're a leader, people make some progress and they snap back. And so you just have to kind of think about that as the leader so that you're out ahead and there's like a rubber band all the way around all of us as a group and you're pulling people along and you're moving, but then sometimes do that and pull you right back. So I think it's all of those things, but you've got to just assess the situation and figure out what your constraints are in terms of time to process and help people along versus just having to call the question.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've gotten so deep into this conversation because I was just so excited to have you in that seat. But I want to go back to where I usually go at the beginning, and that is to ask you to lean into helping me articulate and describe the title of this podcast. I called it Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership because I like all three literally. A vacation is going to the distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky for me because I like all three literally. For me, I also love the metaphor, and that's what I would love for you to weigh in on as you sip your champagne. For me, the metaphor of whiskey is doing what you enjoy with the folks you enjoy it with, kind of your crew, your like-minded people who support you. Jazz is how do you get from where you are to where you need to be, even in situations where the plan that you laid out might not work, it might not fit. This does not look like what happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago, so I can't do that exact same thing. I got to figure some stuff out because I still have to get there. And then for me, leadership is an action word. Because marketing is important, strategy is critical, but at the end of the day, someone needs to make the call to say we're taking this action in about 15 minutes. Because if we don't, then we're just going to be admiring the problem and nothing will ever get done. So that's kind of how all of this works in my head. How does that fit with someone who has a massive healthcare responsibility in the Midwest?
So I'll try to do what you just did. But of course I'm going to use champagne instead of whiskey. So, so I would say when I think about whiskey and champagne, the way you just described it, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm so very fortunate that I love my work and I feel called to it. I lead a Catholic, we call it a health ministry. It's a Catholic health system because it was founded 150 years ago by a group of nuns, and it's carried forward. And I'm one of the lay leaders now, currently the steward, the principal steward of the ministry, along with the team. So for me, that's the whiskey champagne part. And I wish everyone had that blessing of loving their work. And that's just unfortunately not the case. My job is to help people, I think, have work of meaningful purpose. And certainly SSM Health fits that. So then I would say the second about how to get from point A to B for the jazz. I talk a lot when we're talking about strategy of healthcare is a very difficult industry, especially right now. And it's a really important one about helping people live their healthiest lives. So I talk a lot about charting the course where this is a compass. It's not a specific map. We're going to have to be really flexible and agile as the industry continues to move because it needs to be affordable and accessible for everybody. And our current health system has a lot of work to do in that vein. So directionally, we know where we want to be a vibrant, strong, sustainable organization in 2050. But we're going to have to be super flexible and be agile to shift and continue to morph while we're on that journey that involves a whole lot of uncontrollable factors. So that's how I think about that. And then the third part around leadership being an action word, I would say, I guess a couple things. I would not deny reality. It's really important to know where you are and understand the current trends in the environment and where your position is in terms of within a given market and where you're serving in order to chart what I was just talking about, charting the course. But you can't spin in place. That's devastating for an organization and the people in it. So you have to be directional and you have to take some risks. Some are going to work and some aren't. But given the industry as it is right now, have to take more risk probably now than ever.
Hey, it's not too late. Hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch the next episode. If you're really enjoying the vibe, leave us a review or become a VIP for guest and show exclusives. Cheers.